The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Lieutenant Sarah Chen stepped into the communal shower area at Naval Base Coronado. Steam rose from the hot water, creating a misty haze that seemed to amplify every whispered conversation. She had arrived earlier than most, hoping to avoid the usual crowd, but as fate would have it, several junior officers were already there, their voices carrying easily in the tiled space. Sarah kept her head down, focusing on her routine. At 5 feet 4 inches with a slight build, she had grown accustomed to standing out in a place where most personnel towered over her. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and despite her compact frame, there was something unmistakably precise about her movements, a controlled efficiency that spoke of years of training. "Look who decided to join the big leagues," came a snide voice from across the shower area. Petty Officer Marcus Webb, a muscular man in his mid-20s, stood with 2 other junior officers, all of them looking like they had stepped off a recruiting poster. Webb had been making these comments for weeks now, ever since Sarah had been assigned to their unit. "I heard she got fast-tracked through some diversity program," whispered another voice. "No way someone that small actually made it through legitimate training." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she continued washing, her movements deliberate and calm. She had heard variations of these comments countless times throughout her military career. The assumption was always the same, that her presence was somehow unearned, that she was taking up space meant for someone else. "Seriously, though," Webb continued, his voice growing louder and more confident as his audience chuckled. "What's she gonna do in a real situation? Hide behind the rest of us? I've seen high school kids who could probably bench press more than her." The other officers erupted in laughter, the sound echoing off the shower walls. One of them, a lanky redhead named Kowalski, added his own commentary. "Maybe they're planning to use her as bait. Send her in first because no one would expect it." Sarah turned off her shower and reached for her towel, wrapping it around herself with practiced efficiency. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting for a reaction, hoping for one. These men thrived on getting under people's skin, on establishing their dominance through mockery and intimidation. "I bet she's never even seen real combat," Webb pressed on, emboldened by the silence. "Probably spent her whole career pushing papers at some desk job before they decided to play dress-up and put her with the real soldiers." As Sarah gathered her toiletries, she caught Webb's reflection in the metal mirror above the sinks. He was grinning widely, clearly pleased with his performance. His friends were still chuckling, glancing between him and Sarah like spectators at some cruel entertainment. "You know what I heard?" Kowalski chimed in, lowering his voice to a stage whisper that was still perfectly audible. "I heard she's actually someone's niece or something. Family connections, you know? That's the only way someone like that ends up in a unit like this." The comments stung more than Sarah would ever admit. Not because she believed them, but because she knew how these rumors spread, how they poisoned the well of respect before she even had a chance to prove herself. She had worked twice as hard as most of her male counterparts, had pushed herself through training that had broken men twice her size, had earned every qualification and commendation through blood, sweat, and pure determination. But in this moment, standing in a shower facility while being mocked by junior officers who knew nothing about her background, she made a choice that had served her well throughout her career. She said nothing. Sarah finished gathering her things and walked toward the exit, her bare feet silent on the wet tiles. As she passed the group of men, Webb called out one final taunt. "Hey, Chen! Try not to slow us down during drills today, all right? Some of us actually take this job seriously." The door swung shut behind her with a soft thud, but the laughter continued, muffled now but still audible through the thin walls. Sarah stood in the hallway for a moment, her hands steady despite the anger coursing through her veins. She had learned long ago that responding to such provocations only gave them more ammunition, more reasons to dismiss her as emotional or unstable. Instead, She walked to her quarters with the same measured pace she always maintained, her mind already shifting to the day ahead. There would be training exercises, briefings, equipment checks, all opportunities for her to demonstrate the competence that her critics refused to acknowledge. In her small, Spartanly furnished room, Sarah dressed in her uniform with the same precision she applied to everything else. Each crease was sharp, each insignia properly positioned, each element of her appearance meeting the exacting standards she had set for herself years ago. The face looking back at her from the mirror was calm, professional, unremarkable in the way that had often worked to her advantage. As she prepared for the day's activities, Sarah reflected on the irony of her situation. These men who mocked her size and questioned her capabilities had no idea who they were really dealing with. They saw her gender, her stature, her quiet demeanor, and made assumptions that couldn't have been further from the truth. The morning briefing was scheduled for 800 hours, and Sarah planned to be there early as always. She would sit quietly, take notes, ask relevant questions, and perform her duties with the same excellence that had brought her to this point in her career. Eventually, she knew the truth would reveal itself. It always did. But for now, she was content to let her critics believe what they wanted to believe. Their ignorance was, in many ways, her advantage. The underestimation she faced daily had become a tool she wielded with expert precision, allowing her to move through spaces and situations with a level of observation and analysis that those who commanded attention through size and bluster could never achieve. As Sarah left her quarters and made her way across the base, she passed other personnel going about their morning routines. Some nodded respectfully, others barely acknowledged her presence. She had grown accustomed to both reactions, understanding that respect in the military was something that had to be earned through action, not assumed through rank or reputation. The base was coming alive around her, vehicles moving between buildings, personnel conducting equipment checks, the distant sound of physical training sessions beginning. It was a world she had fought to become part of, a world that still questioned her right to be there, but a world where she had every intention of proving that appearances could be devastatingly deceiving. The morning briefing room buzzed with the usual pre-meeting chatter as personnel filed in and took their seats. Sarah entered quietly and chose a spot near the back, her notebook and pen arranged neatly on the table before her. She observed the room with practiced eyes, noting the informal hierarchies, the friendship clusters, and the way certain individuals naturally commanded attention while others faded into the background. Webb and his crew had claimed seats in the middle section, their voices carrying as they discussed weekend plans and shared inside jokes. Kowalski was regaling the group with a story about a bar fight, his animated gestures drawing laughter from the surrounding tables. None of them paid any attention to Sarah, which suited her perfectly. Commander Patricia Hayes entered at precisely 0800 hours, her authoritative presence immediately commanding silence. Hayes was a respected officer with 20 years of service, known for her no-nonsense approach and tactical brilliance. She had been running this unit for 3 years, transforming it from a mediocre assignment into one of the most effective teams on the base. "Good morning, everyone," Hayes began, her voice carrying easily through the room. "Today we're conducting a comprehensive tactical exercise that will test everything we've been working on for the past 6 months. This isn't just about individual performance, it's about how well you function as a unit under pressure." Sarah straightened slightly, her attention fully focused. These exercises were opportunities to demonstrate capabilities that couldn't be measured in a weight room or on a running track. Strategy, quick thinking, adaptability. These were the qualities that truly mattered in operational situations. "The scenario involves a hostage rescue in an urban environment," Hayes continued. "Multiple entry points, unknown number of hostiles, civilians at risk. You'll be working in teams of 4, and each team will be evaluated on tactical approach, execution, and adaptability to changing circumstances. As Hayes began calling out team assignments, Sarah noted the careful balance of skills and personalities being created. When her name was called alongside Webb, Kowalski, and a quiet communications specialist named Rodriguez, she saw the barely concealed smirk that crossed Webb's face. "This should be interesting," Webb muttered to Kowalski, just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Hope our team doesn't get disqualified for having dead weight." Rodriguez shot him a warning look but said nothing. He was one of the few personnel who had never joined in the mockery, maintaining a professional neutrality that Sarah respected. His technical skills were exceptional, and she suspected he would be a valuable teammate if the others could set aside their prejudices long enough to function effectively. The teams were given 30 minutes to review the mission parameters and develop their initial approach. Sarah studied the building schematics with intense focus, noting sightlines, potential choke points, and alternative routes. Her mind worked through multiple scenarios, calculating risks and contingencies with the methodical precision that had been drilled into her through years of advanced training. "All right, here's what we're going to do," Webb announced, assuming leadership without consultation. "Rodriguez handles communications, Kowalski takes point on entry, I'll provide cover and tactical coordination, Chen—" He paused, looking at her with barely disguised annoyance. "You can watch our backs. Try not to get in the way." Sarah nodded calmly, making notes in her small pad. She had identified at least 3 significant flaws in Webb's proposed approach, but she knew that pointing them out now would only escalate tensions. Better to adapt and improvise as the situation developed. "The building has multiple floors," she said quietly. "Shouldn't we consider—" "Look, Chen," Webb interrupted, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "I appreciate the enthusiasm, but tactical planning is kind of my thing. Why don't you just focus on keeping up with us out there?" Kowalski chuckled, but Rodriguez remained focused on the technical specifications. Sarah could see that he was running his own calculations, probably reaching some of the same conclusions she had about the weaknesses in their current plan. The exercise began with all teams deploying to their assigned starting positions around the mock urban environment. The facility was an impressive setup, a multi-story building complex with realistic interiors, populated with role-playing civilians and opposing force personnel armed with simulation weapons that would register hits electronically. Sarah's team approached their designated entry point, with Kowalski leading the way according to Webb's plan. The initial breach went smoothly, but within minutes it became clear that the opposition had anticipated their approach. Simulation rounds began impacting around them as hidden defenders opened fire from elevated positions. "Contact left!" Webb shouted, diving for cover behind a concrete barrier. "Rodriguez, we need eyes on their positions." The communications specialist was already working, his equipment scanning for electronic signatures and movement patterns. But the defenders had chosen their positions well, using the building's architecture to create overlapping fields of fire that made advancement extremely difficult. Kowalski was pinned down near the entrance, unable to advance without exposing himself to multiple firing positions. Webb's cover position offered protection but little tactical advantage. Their carefully planned assault was falling apart within the first 5 minutes. Sarah observed the situation from her position at the rear of the team, her mind rapidly processing alternatives. She had spotted at least 2 routes that could provide flanking opportunities, and she had identified the probable location of the opposition's command element based on their coordination patterns. "Webb," she called softly, "if we can get someone to the 2nd floor, there's a way to—" "Stay in position, Chen," he snapped back. "I'm trying to figure this out." But his frustration was evident in his voice, and Sarah could see that their current approach was leading nowhere except potential mission failure. The opposition forces were patient and disciplined, content to maintain their advantageous positions while the assault team exhausted their options. Rodriguez caught Sarah's eye and nodded slightly toward a side passage that none of them had initially considered. His technical scans had revealed it as a potential route, but it would require someone small and agile enough to navigate what appeared to be a maintenance corridor. Sarah made a decision that she knew would upset the team's dynamics, but might salvage their mission. Moving with practiced stealth, she began working her way around the engagement area, using cover and concealment techniques that had been refined through countless hours of specialized training. Webb was too focused on his direct confrontation with the opposing forces to notice her movement immediately. By the time he realized she had left her assigned position, Sarah had already reached the maintenance access point that Rodriguez had identified. The corridor was exactly what she had expected, narrow, dark, and requiring careful navigation to avoid detection. But it offered exactly what their team needed, an unexpected route that would allow them to bypass the opposition's prepared positions and attack from an angle they hadn't anticipated. As Sarah moved through the building's interior structure, she could hear the continued firefight outside, the electronic simulation weapons creating a realistic cacophony of combat sounds. Webb was still trying to force his way through the opposition's defenses, apparently unaware that his approach was playing directly into their tactical setup. Through her earpiece, she could hear his increasingly frustrated commands to Rodriguez and Kowalski, both of whom were running low on simulated ammunition and options. The mission was approaching failure, and with it, their team's reputation would suffer accordingly. But Sarah had learned long ago that reputation was something earned through results, not proclamations. As she reached the position she had identified for her flanking maneuver, she took a moment to appreciate the irony of her situation. The team member they had dismissed as dead weight was about to become their salvation, if she could execute her plan without compromising their overall objective. The sound of footsteps above indicated that the opposition's command element was exactly where she had calculated it would be. Now came the most critical phase of her improvised plan, the part that would either vindicate her tactical instincts or confirm her teammates' skepticism about her capabilities. Sarah emerged from the maintenance corridor into a hallway that was exactly where her mental mapping had predicted it would be. Through her earpiece, she could still hear Webb's increasingly desperate attempts to coordinate an assault that was doomed to fail. The opposition forces had them pinned down completely, and time was running out for their mission objectives. Moving with the silent precision that had been drilled into her through years of specialized training, Sarah began her approach to the opposition's command position. Her small stature, which had been the subject of so much mockery, now became a tactical advantage as she navigated spaces that would have been impossible for larger personnel to use effectively. The first opposing force member never saw her coming. Using techniques that Webb and his friends couldn't have imagined she possessed, Sarah neutralized the target with efficient, silent precision. The electronic systems registered the elimination, but no alarms sounded, exactly as she had planned. 2 more opposition personnel fell to her methodical advance, each engagement demonstrating a level of skill that spoke of training far beyond what anyone on the base had suspected. Sarah's movements were fluid, calculated, and devastatingly effective. She was dismantling the opposition's defensive structure from within, while her teammates remained trapped in their futile frontal assault. Through the building's windows, she could see Webb's team still pinned down, their ammunition running low, their frustration mounting. Rodriguez was trying to maintain communications while Kowalski attempted to find new angles of approach, but the opposition's overlapping fields of fire made any movement extremely hazardous. Sarah reached the opposition's command element just as they were coordinating a flanking maneuver that would have ended her team's participation in the exercise. The tactical display showed their positions, their movement patterns, their entire operational structure laid out in devastating detail. What happened next took less than 30 seconds, but would reshape every assumption her teammates had made about her capabilities. The opposition command element found themselves facing an opponent they had never expected, someone who moved like smoke, struck like lightning, and demonstrated combat skills that belonged in an entirely different category of military operations. When the exercise concluded 15 minutes later, Sarah's team had achieved complete mission success. The hostages were secured, the opposition forces neutralized, and the tactical objectives accomplished with a level of efficiency that impressed even Commander Hayes, who had been monitoring the exercise from the control room. Webb stood in stunned silence as the after-action reports came in, detailing how the mission had been salvaged by a single operator who had penetrated the opposition's defenses and systematically eliminated their entire command structure. Rodriguez was grinning widely, clearly delighted by the unexpected turn of events. Kowalski looked confused, still trying to process what had just happened. "Excellent work, Team 4, Commander Hayes announced over the communication system. Particularly impressive was the tactical flexibility demonstrated when the initial approach encountered resistance. The flanking maneuver was textbook special operations." As they gathered for the debriefing, Webb kept glancing at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been respect. The woman he had been mocking for weeks had just demonstrated capabilities that he was only beginning to comprehend. "Chen," he said quietly as they walked toward the briefing room, "where did you learn to move like that?" Sarah's response was characteristically calm and professional. "Training," she said simply, offering no elaboration. The formal debriefing revealed the full scope of what had transpired during the exercise. Commander Hayes used their team's performance as a case study in tactical adaptation, highlighting how individual capabilities could be leveraged to overcome seemingly impossible situations. "The key lesson here," Hayes explained to the assembled personnel, "is that effective teams utilize every member's strengths rather than making assumptions based on surface appearances. Team 4 succeeded because someone was willing to think outside conventional parameters." As the debriefing concluded and personnel began filing out, Webb approached Sarah again. His usual swagger was notably absent, replaced by something approaching humility. "Look, Chen," he began, clearly struggling with words, "I owe you an apology. I had no idea you were capable of—" He gestured vaguely, apparently lacking vocabulary for what he had witnessed. Sarah studied his face for a moment, noting the genuine confusion and nascent respect in his expression. "Most people don't," she replied calmly. It was Rodriguez who finally asked the question that everyone was thinking. "What's your background, Chen? That wasn't standard infantry training." For a long moment, Sarah considered her response. She had spent months allowing these people to underestimate her, using their assumptions as camouflage while she observed and evaluated. But the tactical exercise had revealed capabilities that couldn't easily be explained away. "Naval Special Warfare," she said quietly. "SEAL Team designation classified." The silence that followed was profound. Webb's face went through several expressions: shock, disbelief, and finally a kind of horrified understanding as he realized the magnitude of his months of mockery. "You're a SEAL?" Kowalski whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah's calm nod confirmed what their tactical exercise had already demonstrated. She wasn't just any SEAL. She was currently serving as a commanding officer, temporarily assigned to this unit for reasons that were above their security clearance level. "The shower comments," Webb said, his face pale with sudden comprehension. "All those things we said." "Were noted," Sarah replied, with the same professional calm she had maintained throughout their months of harassment. "Along with the assumptions about diversity programs, family connections, and my fitness for duty." Commander Hayes, who had been observing the exchange from across the room, approached with an expression that suggested she had been aware of Sarah's background all along. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," she said formally, "I believe your temporary assignment here is concluding ahead of schedule." The use of Sarah's full rank hit Webb and Kowalski like a physical blow. Lieutenant Commander, a rank that placed her senior to everyone in the room except Hayes herself. They had been mocking a superior officer for months, someone whose credentials and experience far exceeded their own. "I'll be returning to my regular duties next week," Sarah confirmed. "The evaluation period is complete." "Evaluation period?" Webb asked weakly. Hayes smiled grimly. Lieutenant Commander Chen was conducting an assessment of unit cohesion, leadership development, and response to integrated personnel. Her report will influence training protocols and assignment procedures across multiple commands. The implications were staggering. Sarah hadn't been assigned to their unit as a new member requiring integration. She had been evaluating them, studying their reactions, documenting their behavior for institutional analysis. Every mocking comment, every dismissive gesture, every assumption about her capabilities had been observed and recorded by someone whose expertise in special operations exceeded anything they had imagined possible. As the room cleared and personnel returned to their regular duties, Webb found himself alone with the realization that he had spent months publicly humiliating himself in front of someone whose military achievements represented everything he aspired to become. The woman he had dismissed as inadequate was actually operating at a level of professional excellence that made his own accomplishments appear trivial by comparison. Sarah gathered her materials with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else, her expression revealing nothing of whatever thoughts might be running through her mind. She had accomplished her mission objectives, both the tactical exercise and the larger evaluation assignment, with characteristic efficiency. The next morning, as personnel reported for their regular duties, the shower facilities were notably quieter than usual. Word had spread quickly through the unit about Sarah's true identity and capabilities, transforming the casual mockery that had characterized her presence into a profound respect mixed with embarrassment. Webb entered the shower area to find Sarah completing her usual routine, her movements as precise and controlled as always. This time, however, the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of snide comments and cruel laughter, there was a respectful silence that acknowledged the presence of someone whose expertise commanded genuine professional admiration. "Lieutenant Commander," Webb said quietly as she prepared to leave. Sarah paused, meeting his eyes with the calm, evaluative gaze that he now realized had been assessing him all along. "Sir," he continued, his voice steady despite his obvious discomfort, "I wanted to formally apologize for my conduct over the past several months. My behavior was unprofessional and inappropriate, and I understand if there are consequences." For a moment, Sarah studied his face with the same analytical attention she had applied to tactical problems. "The consequences," she said finally, "will be what you make of this experience. Some lessons are more valuable when they're learned through personal failure rather than formal instruction." As she left the shower facility for the final time, Sarah reflected on the irony of her assignment. She had come to evaluate how well the unit could integrate personnel who didn't fit traditional expectations, and in the process had provided them with a lesson about assumptions and respect that would influence their careers for years to come. The report she would file would note that the unit showed promise, but required significant development in leadership maturity and professional judgment. It would recommend additional training in team dynamics and suggest that future assignments include more diverse personnel to prevent the kind of groupthink that had characterized her initial reception. But perhaps most importantly, it would document how even experienced military personnel could be blind to excellence when it came packaged differently than they expected, and how dangerous such blindness could be in operational environments where assumptions could prove fatal. As Sarah prepared for her return to Naval Special Warfare Command, she knew that her months of enduring mockery and disrespect had served a larger purpose. She had gathered invaluable data about organizational culture, leadership development, and the challenges facing modern military integration efforts. The shower mockery had revealed far more about her critics than it ever could have about her, and in the end, that knowledge would prove more valuable than any temporary satisfaction she might have gained from revealing her identity sooner.